You've been campaigning for about a year now, and your opponent's been sporadically campaigning for a couple months. How important is it just to be out there and to have your name out there in the presence?
I think it's real important, particularly the further north or west you get in the state, for people to recognize that people know how people live, that candidates care about them. When I've gone up, for example, 2 weeks ago I went to Superior for the 4th time in the last 12 months. Well, that was a big deal. They said, this guy's actually here enough. He knows that Murphy Oil is a big employer. He knows the Port of Superior brings in $300 million a year in commerce. Those are things you don't pick up on just a 5-minute drop-in off of an airplane stop or a bus stop at the end of the campaign. And I think that's really important because for many voters, if not all of the voters in this state, they want someone that's genuine, that actually understands their fears and concerns and hopes and dreams.
As Milwaukee County Executive, the Democrats have relentlessly attacked you for your budget cuts and your position on low taxes. How important is it for Wisconsin businesses and residents to have a government budget that's balanced and small and to have a low tax burden?
Well, it's tremendously important. If you want to talk about jobs, there's plenty of good reasons to have jobs, to be an employer, to add jobs in the state. A great workforce, wonderful employers and suppliers, tremendous natural resources, a high quality of life. But some of the biggest barriers for our existing businesses to add more jobs in the state are really focused around the cost of doing business, and it's almost entirely driven by the state and the local governments. Higher taxes, higher regulations, more litigation costs are a tremendous problem, particularly as so many of the businesses in the state that aren't doing poor, aren't doing well, but would like to expand in the future. That's what they tell me when I go from plant to plant, small business to small business. So to the extent that we could lower the tax burden, not just hold it, lower the tax burden, ease the regulatory burden, get the frivolous lawsuits and other problems with the society we live in when it comes to legal matters out of the way of business, that makes all the world of difference when it comes to jobs. You know, Tom Barrett and some of his allies, just like Jim Doyle, believe that more government, more spending, more taxes is the answer. I think we've seen in the past year that just doesn't work, and that's why we're in the trouble we're in nationally. Here in Wisconsin, we need a completely different view, and that is lower taxes, less regulation, more focus on the people and employers of the state.
In the last election, we saw young people come out in droves for Barack Obama and the Democrat candidates. Now here we are in 2010. Do you see any reason that they should turn around and vote for a person like yourself?
Absolutely. Every time I go to college campuses, and we've gone to a ton, we've even been to Madison, to the University of Wisconsin. And when I ask people of all ages, whether they're freshmen or senior or graduate student, anywhere in between, I'll ask them, what are you going to do after you graduate? You know, do you have a job lined up? And you know, most people, even seniors, don't quite know what's happening because of the economy out there. I said, you know, you can have people promise you all the things in the world, but if you don't have a job on the horizon, that's ultimately your future. And so that's where young people, I think, get it. I don't write off any voter, any group of voter, any background. I think the majority of those voters in the state get it, and particularly young people get it because of all the information that's available out there. It's a matter of communicating and letting them understand that if you really want a job, if you want a bright future, you've got to have an economy in the state that works. And that's not the government driving it, it's the private sector driving it. You need a leader, as the governor and other leaders in the legislature, who are going to get the government out of the way.
Last month, Governor Jim Doyle announced plans to have a light rail track from Milwaukee to Madison. The cost right now, they say, is about $800 million. What is your thoughts on this?
Well, I've raised a number of concerns. One, the federal government gave it just a little over $800 million, but one of the first questions is that really what it's going to cost? Because in other states and other areas, we've seen the cost escalate after the initial announcement. Secondly, the governor nor any of the supporters have really identified where that funding is going to come from to operate it. They've talked about the cost to build it, to get it up and going, but what do you do to make it run day in and day out? And I think particularly if you're talking about a tax increase, there's no appetite for that out there anywhere in the state of Wisconsin. And third, if you assume that part of the operating costs are going to come from the state transportation fund, well, then the other big question is this governor has rated that fund to the tune of $1.3 billion. That's why things like the zoo interchange in the Milwaukee area are way behind, and we had you had weight limits posted by the Department of Transportation. I don't think anywhere in the state can we afford to have any more backlogs when it comes to our roads and our bridges and highways, and yet something like this could literally take tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars out of that system. So I think there are way too many unanswered questions. For me, it's a lot like, you know, doing a drawing for a new sports car, but if you can't pay the insurance to put that sports car out in the street. What good does it do you to have a brand new sports car that's stuck in your garage? And that's much of what we're facing right now.
For many years, the federal government has been giving states financial assistance for their education programs. The states then redistribute the money to individual school districts. However, this free money comes with mandates. Regardless of the viewpoints of the local community, if their school district takes this money, they must then teach certain curriculum and viewpoints mandated by the federal government. Virtually, the federal government then controls the content of what's being taught in the classroom versus the community and parents and school board members. Is there any way we can break this vice grip that the government has on our education system and return it to the control of parents, local community members, and school board members?
I think so. And I think not only in terms of mandates from the federal government, there's an awful lot of mandates from the state government as well. I think that's when I just recently spoke to about 600 school board members at their state convention. I'm going around the state often meet with superintendents and administrators, school reform advocates, parents, teachers, others out there. And I think there's a pretty much of a consensus that the state mandates make it very difficult, not only for those schools and those districts to teach the sort of core essentials they want to teach to all their students, but also it makes it very difficult to do that in a fiscally responsible way. And there's got to be a balance in that. So I think not only getting federal fighting to invoke the 10th Amendment and other components that really give rights like that to the state, but also making sure the state doesn't pass down an equal or greater number of mandates on our local governments, in this case our school districts.
If you are elected, what will you do to entice business back into Wisconsin?
Well, clearly lowering the tax burden is first and foremost on the list. Cutting taxes, easing regulations, making the few that we have science-based and predictable. Right now we've got too many run-amok bureaucrats who create, through the administrative code, all sorts of problems that creates real inconsistencies. It makes it very difficult to be a business-friendly, a job-friendly state. Ease the regulatory burden, address things like health care, but not through a government-driven model, but instead through a market-driven model, freeing up the state tax and health savings accounts, making health care procedures transparent, tackling education, but again, not necessarily through more spending, but through freeing up local governments to not have the mandates and put more of a focus on the core education components we need to have a qualified workforce. All those things are the sorts of things that focus in on jobs, which is by far our number one and almost exclusive primary objective, and that is you got to build a better business climate. Again, some candidates, including some Republicans, they'll make the mistake of thinking that the government creates jobs. Government doesn't create jobs in my mind. Government either creates an environment that's better or worse, positive or negative for creating jobs. We fundamentally have to create a better business climate. That comes from those specific changes. It also comes from just the enthusiasm of the leader of this state to help keep businesses here and growing, and to attract new ones to come as well.
Does this also apply to the dairy industry? Obviously, they faced 58% decrease in profits last year and lost over $1 billion.
Manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism really built this state over the past 160 years. They're going to take us out of the recession. When it comes to dairy and just agriculture in general, many of the same issues that affect manufacturers and other small and mid-sized businesses are a factor here. And that is the tax burden. Certainly when you've got a lot of property, having a true cap on property taxes is important. When you look at estate taxes, being able to pass from generation to generation on, certainly looking at litigation, even more so than just traditional businesses. When you look at non-point issues there with pollution, when you look at other regulations from not only the DNR, but DADCAP and other entities out there, farmers all the time are telling me they're getting overwhelmed with out-of-control regulations. And when it comes to nuisance lawsuits, that is a tremendous, tremendous challenge for our farmers, and particularly our dairy farmers. You do all that, have a strong right to farm legislation, you have a strong component of citing legislation so that dairy farmers can do what they do best, and that is make us America's dairy land and the greatest producer of cheese in the world. That's what we need to do here in Wisconsin.
In the next couple of weeks, will there be any notable stops around the state where you're carrying your message to the Wisconsin voters?
Oh, every weekend. I mean, this weekend alone, I'll be up in Sauk and Wood and Clark County. The last few weekends, we've been as far away as Douglas, where Superior's at, and Ashland and Bayfield and Price and Sawyer counties. We'll be out on the road. The best place for people to get more information is scottwalker.org. scottwalker.org, and the details are on there about future events, and we keep adding to them every day. Every night I'm somewhere around the state. Every weekend I'm at multiple stops around the state.